She signed that prenup with tears in her eyes, believing she was protecting the man she loved from my broken family, but she had no idea that a single piece of paper would change everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and her own worth. Welcome to Mr. Roberts Stories. If you love gripping tales of love, betrayal, revenge, and shocking twists, you've just found your new home. Here, every story will pull you in, make your heart race, and leave you guessing until the very last word. Now here's the deal. Watch till the end because the best surprises are always saved for last. And if you enjoy the story, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss another unforgettable story. Every story on Mr. Roberts Stories isn't just something you watch. It's something you feel, something that stays with you long after the video ends. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. Trust me, you're going to want to watch every second. This is Mr. Roberts Stories, where every story is an experience. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, inside a small coffee shop on 5th Street, Tiana Williams sat hunched over a pile of spelling tests. With a red pen in hand, she circled mistakes and scribbled encouragement in the margins. The hum of espresso machines and soft chatter around her barely registered. Her focus was on the work. For her, teaching wasn't just a job, it was purpose. She might not earn much, but watching her third graders grasp concepts they once thought impossible gave her a sense of wealth that couldn't be measured in money. But that day her focus wavered. A warm, unguarded laugh rang out from the next table. It wasn't the kind of laugh people usually tried to suppress in public spaces. It was genuine, rich, the kind of sound that made people turn their heads. Tiana looked up. The laugh belonged to a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. He was staring at his phone, amusement lighting up his hazel eyes. When he noticed her watching, he lifted his head and smiled. "Sorry," he said, his voice carrying an easy confidence. "My buddy just sent me the worst dad joke known to mankind." Tiana couldn't help but smile back. "Then it must be terrible. Let's hear it." What followed wasn't just the sharing of a bad joke, it was the beginning of something neither of them expected. His name was James Carter, 29 years old, an investment banker with a sharp mind and a softer heart than his polished appearance suggested. For 2 hours they talked as though they had known each other for years. He asked about her students and listened intently to her stories, laughing at the chaos of classroom life. By the time she packed up her papers, she realized she had been grading more than tests. She had been unknowingly grading him. And somehow he had passed with flying colors. The next 6 months were a blur of joy. James picked her up after school, showed up at her classroom with coffee during lunch breaks, and spent weekends helping her decorate. He would roll up his expensive sleeves and carefully hang children's artwork, treating it like priceless pieces meant for a museum. The worlds they came from were vastly different. His filled with glass towers and financial portfolios, hers grounded in chalkboards and lesson plans. But for a while, it seemed those worlds could blend. Tiana believed she had found the kind of love that novels promised. But novels rarely mention what happens when love collides with class, race, and deeply rooted prejudice. The first dinner at James's family home shattered her illusions. The Carters' colonial mansion loomed large with its marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and walls lined with family portraits that screamed wealth and legacy. Patricia Carter, James's mother, greeted her at the door. A retired judge with a posture that never softened, Patricia's smile was polite but sharp, her eyes scanning Tiana like a juror assessing a defendant. "So, you're the teacher James has been telling us about?" Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension. The word teacher landed like an insult, though it was cloaked in civility. Dinner was an exercise in endurance. Patricia asked questions that weren't questions at all, but carefully veiled attacks. "Teaching must be so rewarding spiritually. I imagine the hours are nice, even if the pay isn't." Each comment made Tiana's chest tighten, though she forced herself to respond with grace. William Carter, James's father, was gentler, asking about her students with mild interest, but his eyes often flicked toward his wife, as though waiting for her approval before speaking further. James defended Tiana here and there, but his defense was weak, almost as though he didn't recognize the sharp edge beneath his mother's words. He had grown up in a world where subtle prejudice wore the mask of practicality, and condescension was disguised as concern. Tiana left the Carter estate that night with a hollow feeling, reminding herself she wasn't marrying Patricia. She was marrying James. Love would be enough. It had to be. When James proposed, her doubts faded, at least for a moment. On a Saturday morning in the park where they had their first date, he dropped to one knee and offered her a diamond ring that caught the sunlight. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she said yes. For 30 seconds her life felt like a fairy tale. But fairy tales crumble when reality steps in. When they told his parents, Patricia's reaction wasn't joy. It was calculation. "Well," she said, her tone as smooth as glass, "I suppose we'll need to discuss a prenup." The air grew heavy. James shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't argue. "Mom, can we at least celebrate first?" he said weakly. But his silence spoke louder than his words. That night, Patricia called Tiana directly. Her voice was calm, almost sympathetic, but every syllable carried a dagger. "Tiana, dear, I hope you understand this isn't personal. James has worked so hard to build his career. With your situation, well, we need to protect what he's built." Her situation. Patricia didn't have to say the words. Black, working class, not their equal. The message was clear. The prenup arrived days later. It was brutal. If the marriage ended, Tiana would have no claim to James's assets, no matter how long they had been together. Alimony would last only 2 years and at a minimal amount. If James died, she would receive nothing from his estate beyond a modest insurance payout. And the final clause was the cruelest of all. If she embarrassed the family or damaged their reputation in any way, she would receive nothing. The Carter's lawyer explained each detail with icy precision while Patricia sat back, satisfied, watching Tiana with a smile that felt like victory. James sat beside her, occasionally wincing, whispering, "It's just a formality, babe. It doesn't mean anything." But it did mean something. It meant they didn't see her as a woman who loved their son, but as a threat. It meant they saw her not as James's equal, but as a danger to their fortune and their image. Tiana's heart ached as she stared at the contract. Every ounce of pride in her body screamed for her to walk away. But love makes fools of even the strongest souls. She loved James, or at least the version of him she wanted to believe in. The man who hung children's drawings like masterpieces, who made her laugh at awful jokes, who held her hand when she was tired. She wanted to prove she wasn't the woman his mother thought she was. So she signed. Tears blurred her vision as the pen scratched across the paper. She signed away her rights, her dignity, her security, all while Patricia's satisfied smile widened, as though the older woman had finally won a battle Tiana didn't know she was fighting. James kissed her temple afterward, whispering, "Thank you. You'll see, this will never matter." But even then, in the quiet of that polished office, Tiana knew it did. She had just bound herself to a family who would never see her worth. And in 3 months, fate would prove her right, changing everything in ways none of them could have predicted. 3 months after Tiana signed the prenup, her life unraveled in ways she could never have imagined. It began with a phone call at work. She was in her classroom, erasing the whiteboard after math lessons when her cell phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed a number she didn't recognize. Answering distractedly, she pressed the phone to her ear, only to hear words that made the world blur. "Miss Williams? This is St. Mark's Hospital. Your father, Robert Williams, has been admitted after suffering a heart attack. You should come immediately." Her hands trembled so violently that the marker dropped from her grip. She didn't even remember how she made it out of the classroom, only that she was suddenly in the hospital's sterile corridors, her chest tight, her breath short. Robert Williams had raised Tiana alone since she was 5, after her mother's tragic car accident. He wasn't just her father, he was her anchor, her compass, her biggest champion. A quiet, humble man, he had worked long hours at an office job that seemed ordinary, but he never missed a school play, a recital, or a parent-teacher conference. He had given her everything he could, even when they didn't have much. Now, lying pale and still in the hospital bed, he looked smaller, diminished, and it broke something deep inside her. For 3 days, Tiana stayed by his side, holding his hand, whispering prayers and begging for a miracle. James was there too, bringing coffee, rubbing her back, quietly reassuring her when she broke down. In those moments, she remembered why she had fallen for him. He could be kind, thoughtful, steady. For fleeting hours, it felt like the two of them against the world again. On the 3rd day, as the machines beeped steadily in the background, Robert stirred. His fingers squeezed hers faintly. His lips parted, and his voice, hoarse and weak, managed to form a single message. "Baby girl, when this is over, go to the bank. Safety deposit box. Everything you need is in there." Tiana's tears fell hot and fast as she nodded, clutching his hand like a lifeline. 2 hours later, he was gone. The funeral was small, just as Robert would have wanted. Neighbors came, along with a few of his colleagues and some of Tiana's fellow teachers. They shared stories about his quiet generosity, how he had helped a neighbor with rent once, how he never failed to check on people when they were struggling. James stood beside her through it all, his arms steady around her shoulders. But grief carved deep into Tiana's chest, leaving her numb and hollow. She thought losing her father was the hardest thing she'd ever face. She was wrong. A week after the funeral, she received another unexpected call. This time, it was from a man named Mr. Thompson, who introduced himself as her father's attorney. "I've represented your father for over 20 years, he said. "He left instructions for me to meet with you. We should discuss his estate." Tiana almost laughed. Estate? Her father had lived in a small rented apartment and driven a car older than her teaching career. He barely had savings. But curiosity, and her father's cryptic final words, led her to the attorney's office. Mr. Thompson was an older man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He handed her a single key, its weight surprisingly heavy in her palm. "Your father wanted you to open a safety deposit box before we spoke further," he explained. "He insisted you do this alone. Once you've seen what's inside, come back to me." Confused but determined, Tiana found herself standing in front of a massive marble-columned bank downtown later that afternoon. The building itself seemed imposing, almost out of place for the life her father had led. The clerk escorted her to the vault and slid the metal box onto the table before leaving her alone. With trembling hands, Tiana inserted the key and lifted the lid. Her breath caught. Inside lay a stack of documents, old photographs, and neatly bound letters. The first thing that caught her eye was a newspaper clipping from 1995. Local tech entrepreneur sells startup for $2.8 billion. The photograph showed a much younger Robert Williams shaking hands with executives, smiling proudly. Tiana's mind reeled. This can't be real. Her father? Billionaire? No, he had worked in a plain office job all her life. He had worn old suits, driven an old Honda, and pinched pennies. But as she dug deeper, the truth unfolded. Stock certificates, bank statements, portfolios worth staggering amounts, photographs of Robert at charity galas, business meetings, and conferences, posing alongside people whose faces she recognized from magazine covers and Wall Street articles. Her father had been a tech pioneer, founder of a company called Secure Flow Technologies, specializing in software for financial institutions. He had sold it in 1995 for billions, and then quietly stepped away, choosing a life of modesty. Her hands shook as she opened the letters addressed to her. "I never wanted you to grow up defined by money," one read. "I wanted you to know that your worth comes from who you are, not what you have. But now you're old enough to understand the responsibility that comes with this. Use it wisely, baby girl. Use it to make a difference." Tears blurred her vision as she read letter after letter, each one filled with her father's love and wisdom. He had hidden his fortune not to deceive her, but to protect her, to give her a childhood where she learned the value of kindness, resilience, and independence. When she finally returned to Mr. Thompson's office, her world had shifted on its axis. "Your father's assets, after taxes and commitments he'd already made to charity, leave you with just over $2 billion, the attorney explained gently. $2 billion. The number didn't even feel real. Her father, the man who had worn worn-out shoes and cooked simple meals, had left her a legacy bigger than she could fathom. As she sat in stunned silence, one thought clawed its way to the surface. Patricia's smug smile as she watched her sign the prenup. The way she had patted her hand at dinner like she was some charity case. The prenup that stripped her of everything, written as though she was nothing. If only they knew. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. The Carters thought they had been protecting their son. But the truth was she had just inherited more wealth than their entire family combined. And suddenly the game had changed. 4 days after discovering her father's hidden fortune, Tiana lived in a haze. Grief still clung to her, but beneath it, a storm brewed. Her father's death had cracked her heart open, but the truth he left behind stitched it with steel. She was no longer the meek schoolteacher who had signed a humiliating prenup under Patricia Carter's watchful eye. She was the heir to a legacy, one worth billions. And though she hadn't yet figured out how to wield that power, she knew one thing for certain. She would never allow the Carters to look down on her again. It was James who unknowingly set the stage for her revelation. "Mom wants us over for dinner this weekend," he said casually one evening as they sat together in his apartment. He didn't notice the way Tiana's jaw tightened. "She wants to talk about wedding arrangements." Tiana had been dreading it. But instead of shrinking back, a strange calmness settled over her. Perhaps it was time. "Fine," she said softly. "Let's go." Saturday arrived like a brewing storm. The Carter mansion stood tall and gleaming, its golden chandeliers spilling light onto polished marble floors. Everything about it screamed wealth, power, and legacy. But for the first time, Tiana didn't feel small standing at its gates. She walked in wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her curves with understated elegance. A diamond pendant, a gift from her father's collection, rested against her collarbone. She had chosen it deliberately, a quiet symbol of who she was now. Patricia was waiting in the dining room, her posture regal, her smile sharp. William sat beside her, flipping through a newspaper while James's younger sister, Claire, scrolled on her phone. "Tiana," Patricia said, her voice warm in the way winter sunlight was warm, bright but without heat. "Lovely of you to join us. You look nice." "Thank you," Tiana replied smoothly, her tone even. She didn't flinch at the faint pause before nice. Dinner began with idle chatter. Patricia steered the conversation with surgical precision, discussing guest lists, venues, family friends who must be invited. Every so often she slipped in a pointed remark. "Of course we'll need to keep the reception tasteful. Simplicity suits your background, doesn't it?" Claire snorted into her glass, and William cleared his throat uncomfortably. James glanced at Tiana apologetically but said nothing. The old Tiana would have bitten her tongue. Tonight she only smiled. "That won't be a problem," she said lightly, her voice calm. "Though, I imagine my father would have wanted me to celebrate properly. After all, he built quite a legacy of his own." Patricia arched a brow, clearly amused. Yes, he was, what was it again? An office manager?" Tiana set down her fork and looked Patricia directly in the eyes. Her voice was steady but it carried weight. "No. He was Robert Williams, founder of Secure Flow Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it?" The name dropped into the room like a bomb. Patricia's smile faltered. William's newspaper slipped from his fingers. Even Claire looked up from her phone, frowning. James blinked, confusion written across his face. "Wait, Secure Flow? The software company? That was sold in 1995 for $2.8 billion, Tiana finished, her gaze never wavering from Patricia's. "My father walked away from it all to give me a normal life. I only found out after his passing. He left the entire estate to me." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Patricia's composure cracked for the first time. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to her husband, then back to Tiana. You're saying?" "That I am Robert Williams's only heir," Tiana said firmly. "That I now control assets worth over $2 billion. Yes, Patricia. That's exactly what I'm saying." James stared at her, shock written across every line of his face. "Tiana, why didn't you tell me?" "I only just found out," she said, softer now as she turned to him. "I've been grieving my father, James. I needed time to process before making it public." The room shifted. Power, once firmly in Patricia's hands, now pulsed around Tiana. And Patricia felt it. She forced a brittle laugh, trying to regain control. "Well, that's surprising news. Of course money doesn't change who you are. You'll always be," her words faltered as she realized how condescending they sounded. "Always be what?" Tiana asked gently, her smile edged with steel. "The poor schoolteacher who wasn't worthy of your son? Or the black woman you thought would drag your family's reputation down?" The words hit like glass shattering. Patricia's face flushed, her mask slipping. "I never said that," she whispered harshly. "You didn't have to," Tiana replied. For once William spoke up. His voice was quiet but firm. "Patricia." He rarely interrupted her, but now his gaze was on his wife, and it was filled with something close to reproach. "That's enough." James reached for Tiana's hand but she pulled away. Her chest was tight, her heart pounding, yet her voice remained calm. "I signed your prenup, Patricia," she said evenly, "because I thought love mattered more than pride. I was willing to humble myself, to prove I wasn't after money. But now, the irony is laughable. Your son could sign my prenup tomorrow, and it wouldn't make a dent in what I have." Patricia sat frozen, her authority slipping through her fingers like sand. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally Tiana pushed back her chair. "Thank you for dinner," she said, her voice cool. "But I think I've had enough for tonight." She rose gracefully, her diamond pendant catching the chandelier's light, and walked toward the door. Every step echoed like a declaration. James stood quickly. "Tiana, wait." But she didn't. Not tonight. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin, but her blood still burned with adrenaline. For the first time she felt the full weight of her father's gift. Not just the money but the power, the freedom, the dignity that came with it. Patricia Carter had tried to make her small. But Tiana Williams would never be small again. The week after the dinner at the Carter mansion felt like living inside a storm. Tiana's phone buzzed constantly with messages from James. Apologies, explanations, desperate pleas for her to talk. Patricia had also reached out, though her tone had shifted from icy superiority to forced civility. Where once she had treated Tiana as an intruder, now her words dripped with false warmth. "We should start fresh," Patricia had written in a carefully crafted email. "Our family has always valued character over wealth, and I believe we got off on the wrong foot." Tiana almost laughed when she read it. Character over wealth? This from the woman who had shoved a prenup in her face and smirked as she signed it? Patricia wasn't apologizing, she was strategizing. But Tiana wasn't the same woman anymore. The naive teacher who had endured humiliation for the sake of love was gone. What remained was a woman who carried not just a fortune, but the wisdom of a father who had lived humbly despite it. The question that haunted her now wasn't whether she could fight back. It was whether she should. James showed up at her apartment one evening, looking more disheveled than she had ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was messy, his tie loose, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Tiana, please," he said as soon as she opened the door. "Don't shut me out. I didn't know my mom would act that way. I didn't know she'd." "Didn't know." Tiana cut in, her voice low but sharp. "James, she humiliated me in front of you for months. She made me sign a prenup that stripped me of dignity and you let her. You didn't stop her, you didn't fight for me. You sat there, silent, and watched me bleed for your comfort." His face paled. I thought it was just formality. I didn't think it mattered. "I love you, Tiana." Her heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. But love without courage wasn't enough. "You stood by while she treated me like I was nothing," Tiana said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. "And now that you know I have money, suddenly everything changes? Do you know how that feels?" James shook his head desperately. "No, it's not about the money. I don't care about that. I swear to you I don't." "Then why didn't you protect me before?" she whispered. He had no answer. Only silence stretched between them, heavy and damning. Finally Tiana stepped aside. "You should go." His shoulders slumped as he walked past her, but before leaving he turned back. His eyes shone with tears. "I'll wait as long as it takes for you to forgive me." When the door clicked shut behind him, Tiana sank onto the couch, her chest aching. She still loved him, God help her she did, but she couldn't ignore the truth. James had chosen silence when it mattered most. Days passed and with them came clarity. Tiana realized that revenge wasn't what her father would have wanted. Robert Williams had walked away from billions not to prove a point, but to live a life of integrity. His letters echoed in her mind, "Use it wisely, baby girl. Use it to make a difference." So she did. She resigned from her teaching job, not because she didn't love her students, but because she could do more now than she ever could inside 4 classroom walls. She established the Williams Foundation for Education, dedicated to funding schools in underprivileged communities, providing scholarships and paying teachers fair wages. Her name began appearing in newspapers, not as James Carter's fiancée, but as a philanthropist and visionary in her own right. For the first time, Patricia Carter saw Tiana not as a liability, but as a force greater than herself. She attempted to reach out again, this time through charity events, trying to align the Carter family name with the Williams Foundation. But Tiana declined every invitation. Patricia had wanted to make her small. Now Patricia was the one left scrambling in her shadow. It was at a gala 3 months later that Tiana and James crossed paths again. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, and the air hummed with the conversations of the city's elite. Tiana stood tall in an emerald gown, her hair swept back, her presence commanding. She no longer felt like a guest in rooms like this, she belonged here. James approached slowly, hesitant, almost nervous. He wore his suit like armor, but his eyes betrayed vulnerability. "You look incredible," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied, her tone polite but distant. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unspoken between them pressing down. "Tiana," James began, his voice low, "I know I failed you. I should have defended you, protected you, stood up to my mother. I was weak, and I hate myself for it. But I love you. I always have." Her throat tightened. Part of her wanted to collapse into his arms, to believe that love could erase the scars. But another part, the stronger, wiser part, knew better. "Love isn't just words, James," she said gently. "It's action. It's courage. You didn't choose me when it mattered most. And now, I've chosen myself." His face crumpled, but he nodded. "I understand. And I'll keep loving you even if it's from afar." For the first time, Tiana believed him. But love wasn't enough, not anymore. That night, as she looked out at the city skyline from her penthouse balcony, Tiana felt a quiet peace. She had lost her father, endured humiliation, and faced betrayal, but she had also risen stronger than ever. Patricia Carter's power games no longer mattered. James's love, though genuine, no longer defined her. She had her father's legacy, her own purpose, and the freedom to carve a future on her terms. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who sat in a coffee shop grading papers, believing love was the only treasure worth chasing. That girl had been broken, but from her pieces had risen a woman who understood that true worth came from within. As the city lights twinkled below, Tiana whispered softly into the night, as though her father could hear. "I'll use it wisely, Daddy. Just like you wanted." And with that, she turned away from the past, stepping boldly into the future, not as the Carter's scapegoat, not as James's fiancée, but as Tiana Williams. A woman unshaken. A woman redeemed. A woman who would never be small again. A year had passed since the night Tiana walked away from James Carter and the family that had once made her feel like she was nothing. So much had changed. The Williams Foundation for Education had become a force of hope across the country. Schools that once struggled with broken desks and outdated textbooks now thrived with modern classrooms, libraries, and well-paid teachers. Scholarships carried hundreds of young people into colleges they had once only dreamed about. And everywhere Tiana went, she carried her father's lessons with her: humility, strength, and the reminder that true wealth was not measured in dollars but in impact. She still lived simply, despite her fortune. Her apartment was beautiful, yes, but warm and lived in, not a palace meant to intimidate. She drove a modest car, cooked her own meals, and never forgot the little routines that once defined her: grading papers in coffee shops, walking home with grocery bags, laughing at silly TV shows late at night. And love? She had found it again, though not where she expected. It came not in glittering ballrooms or penthouse parties, but in a grocery store checkout line. A man had made a joke about the price of cereal and she had laughed, really laughed, the way she hadn't in months. He was a social worker named David, kind and grounded, who saw her not as a billionaire or a prize, but as a woman who loved fiercely and carried scars. David never asked about her money. He cared about her laugh, her stories, the way she lit up when she spoke about her students. And slowly, carefully, Tiana allowed herself to trust again. James's name still appeared in the business pages sometimes. The Carter family still sent her invitations to galas and dinners, hoping to tie themselves to her name. But those chapters were closed. She bore them no hatred, only a calm indifference. Because Patricia Carter's prenup, meant to belittle her, had instead liberated her. It had forced her to see her own worth, to walk away from a love that could not protect her, and to embrace the power her father had entrusted her with. Standing in front of a new school her foundation had built, Tiana cut the ribbon as children cheered. In that moment, she felt her father's presence as surely as if he stood beside her. She smiled, her voice strong as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just a school," she said. "It's proof that no matter where you come from, your worth is immeasurable. It's proof that love, courage, and knowledge can change the world. My father taught me that lesson, and now I'm passing it to you." The applause swelled, and Tiana knew this was her legacy. Not the billions in her bank account. Not the scars left behind by the Carters. But the lives she touched, the dreams she nurtured, and the quiet strength she carried into every room. Her story had begun with humiliation, heartbreak, and loss. But it ended here, with dignity, triumph, and love that was real. Tiana Williams was no longer the woman who signed a cruel prenup with tears in her eyes. She was the woman who turned pain into power and wealth into purpose. And this was only the beginning.